Now, our next panel discussion is entitled Nature-Based Projects, the Opportunities and Challenges and Lessons Learned, where we'll explore the reasons behind the importance of nature-based solution projects for a country like Malaysia. And we promise that this session will be just as engaging and informative as our previous sessions. Now, please join me in welcoming our moderator for panel 4, Rich Gilmore, and joining him are our expert panelists, Edward Ramsey, Managing Partner, Permian Global, Francois Blinot, Head of Carbon, Sarah Carbon, Dr. Jane Koh, Director, Southridge, Malaysia, William Ackworth, Executive Director, Pollination, and Liam Marshall, Director, APAC, B0 Carbon. Now, Rich Gilmore is the CEO of Carbon Growth Partners, a leading investment manager in global carbon markets. Rich's diverse background spans careers in the financial markets, climate change, and science. In 2022 and 2023, Rich was named one of Australia's Green Power 100, those leading the transition to a low-carbon future. He has conceived, designed, and implemented more than 400 million USD in innovative climate and natural capital investments in the past 5 years. Rich, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be back in Malaysia. I spent many years here in my younger years. My mum lived in the limestone hills of Ipoh, so it's great to be back. And it's really great to witness the economic transformation of Malaysia. In the 6 decades or so since independence, Malaysia has transformed from a largely agrarian society to one where today Malaysia earns more income from semiconductors and electronics than it does from agriculture. And is a leader provider of energy and automotive industries, financial services. And that transformation has been highly lucrative for the people of Malaysia. Malaysians are now, on average, the 3rd wealthiest people in ASEAN, and fewer than 3% of Malaysians live below the average global poverty line. And that prosperity is challenged by climate change and by climate policy. In fact, Malaysia is perhaps more challenged by climate policy and climate change than many of its neighbours in other parts of the world. And that's because Malaysia is so export intensive. Something like 3/4 of Malaysia's export GDP is earned from exports, which means it's highly exposed to global policy. And we've heard a lot about the global policy today. So previous panels, we won't double up, have talked about Malaysia's NDC and domestic carbon pricing and the coming carbon tax and exposure to the European CBAM, the non-market initiatives, and of course, Bursa Carbon Exchange and the launch of the Malaysian Carbon Market Alliance. Which brings us to today's session and how nature in particular can help mitigate that risk and realise that opportunity for Malaysia. Just to set the scene on nature in Malaysia, the Malaysian folks attending will know this, but more than half the country is forested. And some of those forests are truly ancient. There's, forests in Malaysia that are 130 million years old. To put that into perspective, that's forests that were here in Malaysia 65 million years before the dinosaurs went extinct. And Malaysia still has 80% of its primary forests, and primary forest loss has declined by 2/3 in the past 12 years since it peaked in 2012. And so we have a brilliant panel today to talk about the role of nature in achieving Malaysia's climate and economic aspirations. Firstly, Francois Blinot. He's the head of carbon for Sarah Carbon, more than 3 decades of experience in forestry and a driving force in environmental conservation. Originally starting his journey in South Africa, 14 years with the South African Forestry Company, then joined Samling Group in 2007 and is now leading carbon finance for Samling as head of the carbon projects. Liam Marshall is the Asia Pacific lead for B0 Carbon. He's been there 4 years now. That must make you one of the earliest employees into employee number 3. I hope you've got some equity in the business, Liam. Recently moved to Singapore, and amazingly, Liam and I are from the same small town of a few hundred people in rural Australia. William Ackworth, Executive Director at Pollination, deep technical experience in climate economics. Before he joined Pollination, he was at Adelphi Consulting, leading carbon markets and pricing, and has got deep experience in implementation of carbon projects as well. Jane Cohen, and Jane, I'll ask you about your bio shortly, but the Director of Southern Ridge Malaysia, nature-based carbon project developer, and deep experience in nature-based solutions, formerly at Shell, and is a long-term veteran of the energy and technology industries. And finally, Ed Rumsey, Managing Partner of Permian Global, a business working for the protection and recovery of tropical forests globally, including here in Malaysia. We might touch on Ed's projects in a moment. As you've heard today, this is a complex ecosystem, and so what we thought we would do is give each of the panellists a minute or two just to talk about their business's role in the ecosystem and how it can help power Malaysia's transition to a sustainable, climate-focused economy. So I'm going to start randomly with Francois. Give us 1 or 2 minutes about Sara Carbon and your role here in Malaysia.
Hey, thanks, Rich. Right, so yeah, Sara Carbon started the first nature-based solution project in Sarawak. So it's a first for the company, and it's a first in Sarawak. And being the first is not always the best, and there's a lot of learning and things that we're going through. But we could see the need for this and what carbon and the carbon project could bring to Malaysia and to the whole climate change plans and what is happening in the world at this stage. So yeah, we are developing, and my main function is just in developing the project, and we've got a team to work on all the other facets, but mine is just focusing on getting the project off the ground, do all the groundwork, and yeah, doing the validation and verification. So that's where we are at this stage. Thank you.
Liam, how's B0 contributing to the opportunities and risks here in Malaysia?
Thanks, Rich. It's really great to be here back in KL. For those who haven't heard of B0 before, we're a ratings agency for carbon markets. So what that means is we operate like S&P or Moody's in traditional financial markets, but rather than a team of economists, we have a team of scientists who assess the likelihood that carbon credits are actually achieving a ton of carbon avoided or removed. And that's a really important question for this market because carbon isn't like a traditional commodity, which is tangible and deliverable. The rating is a metric that sits between buyers and sellers to help navigate quality and ultimately to actually make projects more investable. So how we show that is on an 8-step scale that runs from AAA at the highest end, highest likelihood of achieving a ton, down to single D. And to date, we've rated around 450 projects across all sectors in the market. And that's from nature-based through to engineered removals like biochar, but also traditional avoidance sectors like renewables and cook stoves. And as well as the spot ratings, increasingly the work that we're doing is with early stage projects prior to issuance. And we're fortunate enough to have worked with a number of the pioneering nature-based projects in Malaysia. So yeah, really looking forward to contributing those experiences to a great panel.
Thanks, Liam. William, Pollination is one of the great success stories of the past few years. Now 200 plus people headcount, I think, in the business. How are you adding value here in Malaysia?
Thanks a lot, Rich, and many thanks to Bursa and also AITA for coordinating this fantastic event. It's a pleasure to be here. So my role with Pollination is fundamentally in our advisory business, and we're providing advice to both governments and companies on how they can take climate action and how they can engage with the voluntary and compliance carbon markets. And I think that for governments and for companies, the fundamental message is always the same, that the time for action is now. So it's actually been really pleasing to hear in the earlier sessions a sense of urgency around this, because I think often we can, particularly when we start talking to the details of the carbon market, we can sometimes forget the broader objective, which is that we really must reduce emissions to fix the trajectory that we're on, and that ultimately will require a rewiring of the entire global economy. And there will be winners and there will be losers, both from a country and a company perspective. And if you don't have a plan, then it's likely you'll be on the wrong side of that ledger. So you need to have a plan. And then the question often becomes, well, what role does carbon credits play? And we believe that carbon credits are a fundamental, they should be an integral part of any decarbonisation trajectory. But ultimately, they need to be embedded within a decarbonisation plan that sets clear short, medium, and long-term targets, and where we have companies that are also disclosing on those targets, being very clear what is the role for carbon credits, what types of carbon credits have we purchased, and how do they sit alongside our decarbonisation efforts. So happy to go into more details as we get along. And
speaking of carbon credits, one of the reasons that we're all here today, Ed, congratulations on the recent successful partnership with Bursa Malaysia. What is Permian doing on the ground here in Malaysia?
Yeah, hello. Okay. Yeah, no, thanks, Rich, and thanks to the organisers for inviting us here to speak today. So I'm Ed Rumsey. I'm one of the managing partners of Permian Global, which, as Rich mentioned, we're a business that invests in developing very large-scale forest carbon projects and programs around the tropics on public lands, so partnering with government agencies. So here we've been operating in Malaysia since about 2011, working with the Sabah state government through our partners, Yayasan Sabah, the Sabah Forestry Department and RBJ, to create what is now the first of its kind and largest log-to-protected forest, IFM, conservation project in the state of Sabah, which issued its first verified emission reductions at the end of March of this year, which has been mentioned a number of times. I was asked not to shamelessly plug the business, but I think we can't really avoid it in this stage. The Quamut Rainforest Conservation Project, which hosted on Bursa, Malaysia's BCX exchange, an auction last month for some of those carbon emission reductions. And so what are we doing here in the country? We're developing our first and hopefully many more projects to service not only the domestic, but the international market, the international voluntary market. And that's probably where I'll pause. I'll come back to the ratings later. I think there's something we can talk about there too.
And Jane, before we jump into your first question, tell us a bit about you and Southridge.
Salam Sejahtera. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jane Koh. I'm the director of Southridge here in Malaysia. Southridge is a relatively new company, right? It is started out by a group of people with vast experience in initializing, implementing, and monetizing carbon credit projects. We focus in nature-based. We have a technical expertise in peatland project and in other nature-based solutions projects. We have pipelines of projects here in Malaysia and in Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries. I must say it's a new company. I like working with my team. We are made out of a group of passionate people. We are good in, we are expert in our own field, but we work together. We are forestry expert, biodiversity, community engagement experts. But what is more important is we are all passionate about what we do and we believe that what we do is good for the planet and the people.
That's a good segue to the first question, Jane. Which is actually related to your bio. So you have a master's and a PhD in chemical engineering. You're an author, senior executive and consultant, and you've worked as a senior executive in energy and technology. These booming sectors, and as we mentioned earlier, that are a key part of the Malaysian economy, particularly with the growth of AI and automotive industries and others. And as anyone and as many people in the room know, developing carbon projects is hard. It's a nascent industry. something compelled you to leave those booming in sectors and take a chance on this emerging industry, specifically here in Malaysia. What is it about the Malaysian opportunity that caused you to step away from those booming sectors and take a chance on this native industry and the nascent opportunity?
I think before I get into the Malaysian opportunities, perhaps it's a little bit wider than that. I basically believe in NBS, NBS carbon credits as an instrument to bring money from those who have money, those who like to contribute to climate change, to those who can actually do something about it on the ground, but who needs money to do it, right? Let me tell you a story. A year ago, when I set up a project team in Malaysia, the team consists of Malaysians with qualification ranging from PhD holders to indigenous people, orang asli, who barely finished high school. So I explained to them firstly, none of them know much about carbon credit. So I explained to them what MBS is about, what carbon credit is about, and then I asked them the question, the 17 SDG. How many of these do you think we can contribute? They all say, we believe we have a potential to contribute to all 17 of them. And that is why I'm in this space. Thank you, Rich.
You mentioned there, Jane, I'll turn to William now. Jane mentioned there the transfer of wealth from, people and organisations who have resources to people and organisations who need them. But ultimately, the question that often we ask last instead of first is, who's going to pay? And in your experience working with corporates, what is it that you tell them about the role of carbon credits in decarbonisation, in particular nature-based carbon credits, and as we've heard on other panels this morning, their role alongside direct decarbonisation?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the carbon credits, and including nature-based carbon credits, can allow us to move faster, particularly initially, and so they are a fantastic mechanism, I think, of actually financing projects that really reduce or remove a ton of CO2 from the atmosphere, but also bring with them a whole host of community environmental conservation benefits that have but direct benefits for the communities and the locations in which they're implemented, but they're also aligned with the types of activities that many of the corporates that we advise are seeking to sort of unlock as well. So I think the key question is, I guess, how to get started and how to know how to get that balance right between decarbonisation versus the role of carbon credits. And I must say, it's even listening to the panel this morning, I can understand it's really not easy, because we have standard bodies out there that also seem to be confused, or at least not providing a strong opinion on where they see that balance to be. And many companies are looking to standard bodies to be able to, as an anchor, to set their frameworks and then I guess just get on to work with delivering. And so the way which I think you can navigate through that is actually just being very clear and transparent in terms of, well, what is the role that you want carbon credits to play in your decarbonisation strategy? And they can do different things. So for some, I guess there is the classic SBTI approach, where we're talking about offsetting residual emissions of the hardest to abate as part of a net zero claim. But others are looking to carbon credits for a meaningful way to create a shadow price or an internal price on carbon. Others may not be looking to jump into a net zero claim straight away, but they realize that as they're on a pathway towards reducing their emissions, and they may want to compensate for unabated emissions along that pathway. So it's important to sort of reflect on what role you would like carbon credits to play in your decarbonisation strategy, and then be clear in your communication around that. And once you've done that, then it's also imperative that the intersection of your carbon crediting strategy with your decarbonisation goals is clear, both for an organisation and also for your key stakeholders. And so that is short-term, medium-term, long-term decarbonisation goals, and reporting and disclosing against those, as well as what role carbon credits has played alongside that. I believe if you do that, not everybody may agree with the approach, but it's clear, it's transparent, and it can build trust, whilst we're still operating in a world in which we don't really have, for all sectors, a very clear standard as to how we go about it.
There's a bit of the how in there, but are companies asking you, absent I think there was a good way of phrasing it before, the inelasticity of demand and the absence of enough compliance mechanisms. Are companies asking you, in particular for nature-based solutions, which almost by definition happen outside the value chain, are companies asking you, well, you've talked about the how, why should I do this? And if so, what is the answer? Why would a Malaysian company voluntarily decide to protect a forest or restore a forest in Sarawak or Sabah or somewhere else?
Yeah, I think that it's in Malaysia, we're operating with sort of state-owned enterprises as well, and they see a fundamental role in the prosperity of the country, and that is an important thing that they can help contribute through with their decarbonisation strategy. I think for other corporations as well, there is a realisation that climate and nature are intrinsically linked. A lot of our supply chains are contingent on nature. So also financing nature-based solutions as part of a climate strategy in your own backyard also makes sense, because it improves the resilience of our supply chains and ultimately makes us a better organisation going forward. And
you talked about trust and integrity and the importance of those things earlier. And Liam, we've heard today again a lot of times. I said to the panellists earlier, I would electroshock the first person who said we need more integrity in the market. So I'm going to turn this completely around, Liam, and ask, when those companies are taking the action that William's talking about, they want to do that with confidence, and they want to see that projects are high quality. So rather than asking you the usual question around what's wrong with the market, tell us what's going right, tell us what the good projects are doing well, and what Malaysia can learn from the projects that are doing well.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So we've got a database of thousands of projects, and we've done in-depth project ratings on hundreds, as I mentioned. And what we have found is that looking at the historical stock, there is a real range of quality. And even when you zoom in and look at specific project types or sectors, it's the same thing. There's a fair bit of variation when you think about what has the market been made up of previously. So for example, avoided deforestation projects we see ranging from AA to D, so very high down to quite low. And it's a similar story for afforestation from AA to C. But with the focus, I'd say, on integrity in particular and some of the criticisms over the last 18 months, project developers need to be, and in our experience they have been, hyper-focused on getting integrity right, and that's really flowing through the results. So to give you a high-level example before getting into the specifics, we recently gave out our first A-rated cookstove project. As a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, know, cookstoves are having massive health impacts on underdeveloped communities, but at times they have been historically maligned from a carbon efficacy perspective. But we're seeing through the improved methods, through the improved science and technology, that they're overcoming, they're sort of addressing those issues head on, and it's becoming a really exciting sector. But when I think about some of the specifics for projects that are demonstrating high integrity, the first thing that I'd point out is really focused on carbon efficacy, and it comes down to baseline setting. So is it verifiable? Is it conservative? The methods by design leave a lot of scope in how you implement a project, and that can result in wildly different issuance profiles. But as Wynne pointed out at the start of the day, just trying to maximise issuance isn't necessarily the best approach if you're trying to get a high integrity project. And if you get that right, that's going to do a lot of things, but it's going to bolster the additionality of the project by really having a strong counterfactual scenario. And it's also going to avoid some of the key over-crediting or carbon accounting risks that have been pointed out in the market previously. The second point that I'd say is a bit of a broader point, and it's around project safeguards. And this can cover everything from FPIC and community engagement through to things like the legal framework and the regulatory framework or ecosystem assets. And getting this part right, even though it's a huge amount of work, as I'm sure a few people on the panel would be able to tell us, is going to address some of the key question marks around non-permanence, but also bolster the project in the eyes of buyers who want to invest in holistic projects that are not just impacting, reducing carbon, but also having that impact on the ground. And I think what is a really positive thing to me is that the market is maturing to understand these kind of trade-offs. So to put that in an example, if I'm a cook stove developer who is taking a haircut on issuance because I'm now using a 30% FNRB rather than I used to be able to use 90% FNRB, I clearly need to be paid more per credit to make this a bankable project. But getting that project data, the fundamental data to make those sort of comparisons is a hard thing, and that's where the rating agencies can help in understanding those kind of trade-offs. And I think ultimately that's going to help with building trust in the market and raising the value of these projects as well.
And just to play the devil's advocate there, Liam, let's say using the cook stoves are not really counted in the nature-based solutions taxonomy, but they are delivering very significant nature-based outcomes, even though they're not considered nature-based solutions. If you're a developer and you've got the choice between delivering 3 times the volume at $3 a tonne or a third of the volume at $9 a tonne, is the willingness to pay really there yet for the $9 a tonne, or will developers just be motivated to go for lower cost? Can you see a price signal for that quality yet?
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing because we're not in the market. We're not, a trader or something, but it's something that we are tracking obviously very closely. And when we look backwards a few years, we weren't seeing that strong correlation between quality or the rating and price. But I think that's really starting to shift. And there's a few things driving that. Firstly, buyer behaviour. So buyers want to identify and procure and retire the highest quality projects that they can within their carbon budget to avoid risk and avoid any potential reputational risk and tell the positive story of what's happening on the ground. And I think that's therefore leading to project developers wanting to differentiate their projects positively as well. So that is having an impact on the market from the data that we see, both from a liquidity and a pricing standpoint. So in Q4 last year, for the first time, we saw that retirements of highly rated BBB and above rated projects actually overtook retirements of BB and below. So there is that flight to quality from the retirees, and that's then flowing through to the demand and the pricing of these credits. So we work with exchanges, we work with OTC pricing providers, and we're seeing that there is a strong and growing correlation between the rating and price, or quality and price. In essence, every step up the rating notch equals about a 20% premium. And because there's been that flight to quality, that's even stronger at the top end. So I think that can become that positive feedback loop that drives to better standards, that drives to the outcomes like you were saying, Rich, where people can make those kind of trade-offs that lead to more trust and more integrity in the market.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. And Ed, you're right at the pointy end of this. Carbon projects are complex, but the economics are pretty simple. It's volume times price. And so you've been through the ups and downs of this market. You were around first time it went down, and then in 2021 it looked like it was a roller coaster that only went up. That turned out not to be the case. What's your outlook now? How are you thinking about that, volume times price question? And is it as bad as it seems in the market?
Well, I'm often told I'm the most bullish person in the market, so obviously no, it's not. It's actually quite a nice time out there, but maybe not over-egging it. So, I mean, the advice I'd give to all my fellow panelists and developers out there is that it absolutely is worth spending that additional dollar and going over and above what is necessary to get a project validated and verified. All of our work that we have issued to date over the last 17 years has been either single A or double A rated with these leading carbon accounting some carbon ratings agencies, B0 Carbon and Silvera, I'd say the two leading agencies. And so how do you achieve those high ratings? It's, I don't ascribe to this notion that we should be working towards conservativeness. I believe we should be heading towards accuracy. So what we're trying to do is most accurately forecast the emission reductions and removals that we are achieving by using the best available science and the best available technology. And we've been able to, by demonstrating that we can do that, not only command a price premium in the market, but also the demand that we're achieving. When we issued from Malaysia in the first quarter of this year, that issuance increased total NCS issuance on the Vera registry by 150% year to date. And within the first month, we're probably leaning on reverse inquiry rather than out and actively trying to sell, because the market's coming to us because it's a highly rated, desirable project. So yes, do more than what is necessary, because it's absolutely worth it.
And what do you, so you're saying a bit of reverse inquiry and you're bullish, that's completely counter to the prevailing narrative of the market, and the big question being, you know, where are the buyers? You know, all-time lows for some price of credits. I'm probably the second most bullish person, the carbon market, behind you. So you still have confidence that that demand is going to be there and that retirements are going to be there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think where the market is at the moment, and we're running the risk of going into repetition of the first three plenaries, but where the market is at the moment, I mean, the market really has bifurcated into two very distinct areas. And the one in which we operate is in the primary market. So we only issue and sell our own credits. And if you take the time to develop these very high quality credits, there is a huge amount of demand out there from both trading organizations and end user buyers. What I would say is that we're in a very different world to where we were 2 years ago. So we as a business, the last issuance that came out of our business was in March of 2022. And then our very large work in Indonesia has been working towards its what's called a 10-year baseline renewal. So it's a technical piece of work akin to completely redrafting a project design document, a BDD. So we've effectively been out of the market for the last 24 months. Coming back into the market now, it's quite a different world. So gone are the days where you could go into a corporate office with a nice presentation and a sales agreement and sell some credits in a matter of days or weeks. Now what we will see is that the market is far better educated, far more discerning, but asking the right questions. Even with the more discerning buyer 2 years ago, you were effectively leading them as to which questions they should be asking and what the answers were to those questions. Now it's actually a far more knowledgeable and mature market in which we operate. They're asking the right questions. They understand what the answers are you're telling them. They completely unpick the technical aspects of these documents and whether the project has got any likelihood of creating something that's going to be worthwhile into the future. Now, I still believe there is another part to the market which is very much focused around trading more questionable tons, and I think that will continue to exist, but that's not the area in which we operate.
Thanks, Ed. And Francois, the projects that Ed's doing in Malaysia and Indonesia or elsewhere are mostly about the conservation of intact forests and the restoration of degraded ones. But although, you know, Malaysia is now a diversified modern economy, it still generates about 10% of GDP and 10% of employment from traditional land use, including productive forestry. How can Malaysia and other countries in ASEAN, you know, balance that potentially competing land use where we do need sustainable sources of timber and fibre, and we need forest conservation and protection? In an economy like Malaysia, are those things incompatible?
Rich, thank you. Yeah, I think that is one of the things that I honestly believe is a key in anything that we do, and that's balance. And there will always be a need for timber. The world still needs timber as much as we need conservation. So I think the key that anybody or any country should do, or state in Sarawak, in Malaysia, Sarawak or Sabah or in West Malaysia, is to determine first what is your land use, to make that policy decision on deciding how much of our land would be for production forest, and then how much would be for conservation. If that decision has been made, then it is much easier also for a developer then to go in. But then also if you do the forestry route, or the areas that you decided to do production forest, it's key that that needs to be managed sustainably. I think that is necessary to give people the confidence that, yes, I'm doing conservation projects, I'm doing carbon projects, but on the other hand, my forest that is still production forest are still managed sustainably and they are certified. So that is key that we need to do that. Otherwise, you're also going to end up in people blaming you for greenwashing or whatever if you're still doing a carbon project and you're not doing your forestry portion sustainably. So I think that is key. And then second was also that when your forest, I mean, there's a lot of other things that you can do off your forest in terms of ecotourism. And I think when our neighboring state is Sabah, and I mean, they're a good example of using ecotourism quite well. And as an example of what can be done in using forest, not only for the timber, but also for your non-timber forest products. So to me, there's a balance in what you need to do. You can't go out and say, I want to conserve everything, because that will create an imbalance somewhere else down the line. And
I'll confess I'm often a little bit skeptical about those other complementary sources of income. You know, there's only so many eco-tourists to go around, and there's only so much, you know, honey that you can sell from a project. How much do those other sources of income really contribute to these projects, or is it really just about, you know, the economics? Are they really just about the tons of carbon and the price of carbon? Or is it genuinely an opportunity for developers in the room to, or people thinking about developing projects, to diversify income?
Yeah, I think definitely there is a room for it. But I mean, a lot of times some of those things is also there to create a opportunity for your communities, because that is a key also in any carbon project, is the communities, and everybody is putting a big tag on the community and get the communities involved. And I think it is the portion of education, educating communities, educating people, and getting communities on how to use the forest in a more sustainable way. So yes, it's not going to be a huge income, but it is just to create that opportunity for people to have a different income than creating an income from felling trees and selling timber or on that line.
Yeah, and Jane, what's your you know, experience? Relatively new business, but that role of community engagement, community empowerment, how do we do that well in Malaysia and its neighbours?
I think community engagement is the key piece in nature-based solution. In this part of the world where there is forest, there is people in it, somewhere, somehow. Traditionally, they could use forest for their subsistence needs. But now what we see is, yes, they cut down trees. They want to clear the land because they want to plant oil palm. Right. So what they are seeing is a quick way to making money, to making their living. Yeah. So they need some awareness, some education to tell them what is actually a sustainable way of living, not only for the current generation, and also for their future generations. We see that quite a lot, and a lot of time what they are struggling with is opportunities. Opportunities to be educated properly, opportunities to find steady income jobs, and so on and so forth. So even there's only so many honeybees to go around, so many ecotourism to go around, we create opportunities for them. I'm very happy to see what BCX do with this event, because I come from Sarawak, with this beautiful lanyard that we are making, right, and so on, right? These are opportunities that we empower the local community with. And for a high quality projects, we have been talking about it, right? It's not only bringing emission reduction, but also changing people's life. And only by changing the life of the thinking of the local communities, that's when you can achieve a long-term emission reduction with nature-based solution.
Thanks, Jane. And remember, questions from the audience. We started a little bit late, but we're going to finish on time. So that means we've got about 12, 15 minutes left. So please ask any questions from the audience. I think we might have a couple of virtual questions coming through at some stage. So please throw up your hand if any questions. Yes.
Hello, hi, my name is Kyron. I'm here with Eco-Business, but I also work in forest financing with a company named Nusantara here. My question is to the project developers on the panel, as well as the rating agency. Question about FPIC. In places like Malaysia, where engagement with indigenous people, for example, may not necessarily have meet the standards of, or will be very different from the standards required by the standard setters. So for instance, you've got indigenous communities that are recognized by government via governance structures such as JACOA, which may not necessarily be recognized by the actual people on the ground. Could you say a little bit about how your projects are dealing with these type of issues? Thank you.
We'll go, Jane, you happy to talk about free, prior and informed consent with Indigenous communities, and then give Ed a go?
Yeah, thank you, Harun, for that question. Yes, community engagement, community consultation, and free, prior, informed consent, FPIC, is a process that we need to go through, and we follow standards. We follow the standards we want to validate the project in, but of course we have to be aware of the local politics, local policy. Harun mentioned about JACOA, that is the Indigenous People Development Agency, Jabatan Kemajuan Orang Asli, Malaysia. It's more like on the Peninsula Malaysia side. Sabah and Sarawak, they have a different type of situation. Yeah, and yes, it is right. So when we do FPIC, we are not only just talking to JACOA, we talk to Tok Bating, the official head of village. We talk to unofficial leaders of villages. And in fact, we talk to everybody. Right. I'm in a project right now where I have to go from village to village, literally telling them what the project is about, using the language that they would understand, right? To tell them what they are, to tell them how they are impacted, and to ask them, do you actually understand? Right, and if you understand, would you sign on this piece of paper, which basically say, yes, I understand. No, I do not, right? Before we move on to the next steps of the conditions that we want them to understand and to follow. So yes, FPIC, it is a very involved process, not only just government agency, but actually culturally sensitive way of doing things.
Thanks, Jane. I think that's a really good point for people to understand that FPIC is not an outcome to be achieved. Like, it is a process to be undertaken, and it's an ongoing process for the life of the project. Ed, what would you add?
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with Jane more, but just to add some additional thoughts. So, I mean, the FPIC process is a defined process under the UN. There's methodologies to follow. You have to go over and above what's defined in that. That's the minimum requirements to achieve. You really need to be engaging with and participating through the planning process of the project from day one with the communities. With regards to our project in Sabah, we're actually very fortunate. One of the implementation partners on the ground that we're working very closely with is an organisation called the PACOS Trust. And so if anyone's ever been to Sabah, they've probably come across these guys, as they've got a 4-decade-long track record of working very closely with communities in the region across the entire state. So Permian, by design, we're not expats stomping around in tropical forests. We don't do that. It's Permian Malaysia is the operating subsidiary. We're Malaysian in Malaysia, we're Brazilian in Brazil, we're Indonesian in Indonesia. And so it's our Malaysian team engaging with a Malaysian NGO who's been working with these communities for the last 4 decades to ensure that all of the work is done appropriately.
And Francois, anything to add? You've been doing this for a couple of decades now.
Yeah, I think important thing is from the onset of the project, we set community engagement as a priority, and I think the first thing was to engage the party to talk to the people and use somebody local, and we engaged UNIMAS, University of Malaysia Sarawak, to engage with the communities, and we've gone through 5 stages at this stage on process and where we meet the people. So it's correctly what you said earlier. I just want to underline that, and it's not you do FPIC and you think it's one meeting is over and done with. It is a continuous engagement process, and one thing also to add on to what Jane was saying, it is educating the people also on what is carbon and what is a carbon project, because people don't understand what is carbon, because it's not something you can hold in your hand and you can't see it. So that was also a long process. And even today, if you go to the communities and you might go and ask people there, then they might say they don't understand or they don't know what it is. But it is a continuous process, and we, after we've done the phases that UNIMAS did, we set up our own big team that now continuously is carrying on from where UNIMAS has stopped. And we continue that engagement process and keep on engaging with the communities and trying to explain and tell them what the project is about. So it's really an ongoing process. It's not a one time and then it's done.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
My name is Sam Manan. I'm together with Permian. The question I would like to ask is, what is the biggest threat to your project being still there in time to come?
For those in the audience who may not have heard that, what is the biggest threat to the success of enduring success of projects?
I'm happy to start. I think, well, it depends on the individual project and what is the threat that you're trying to mitigate. These projects are all very different. So the project that we work very closely with Sam and his team, with the government in Sabah, is what's called an improved forest management, IFM logged to protected forest. And so the threat that you're mitigating there was active logging, now logged to conservation site. So that threat is mitigated through taking over the license of and management responsibility over a long period of time. And that's not the only threat. There's always going to be a threat of illegal encroachment and illegal logging in these sites. So how do you mitigate that threat? The way that you mitigate that threat is through providing alternative livelihoods, vocational training for non-destructive activities that are aligned with the principles of the project. So that's, as we've talked about before, non-timber forest products and other sorts of activities. Then other threats could involve things like fires. It depends on the landscape. This landscape in particular that we're operating in Sabah, fire isn't a very large risk for that. But if you go over the border into Kalimantan, fire is a huge risk, and that's probably the largest risk that we're coming up against. And then further down the line, what are the risks about the longevity of the project? There could be policy risks, there could be financial risks, depending on what the market looks like in the future. So there's all sorts of risks you have to think about. It depends on the nature of the specific project, though, I'd say.
Thanks, Ed. Any other questions from the floor? As we mentioned at the outset, I'll give the few minutes left, I'll give the panelists the opportunity of some last thoughts. 20 million hectare forest estate in Malaysia, but also close to 5 million hectares of degraded land. That is not only a threat to the people who live in and adjacent those degraded lands, but a huge opportunity for Malaysia. Restoring those degraded lands could generate $10 billion of capital inflows into Malaysia and billions of dollars a year of revenue, not only from carbon markets, but from sustainable land use. So for those on the panel, maybe we'll just start all the way to my left and come back this way. Speaking to those in the room, Francois, what is the one or two things that, one thing actually you can have, that policymakers, businesses, NGOs in Malaysia need to do to realise this multi-billion-dollar, multi-decadal opportunity for the country?
I think the first thing for me would be from the government side is to get the policy and the governance in place. And I think that if that base is set, it would set the ground for developers to come in. So I think that's the first and important step that needs to be done. And I think the second thing is for people to work together. I think it's always very easy to sit on the sideline and just deliver commentary on what people are doing wrong. And it's much more difficult to make your hands dirty and go in with a developer and help them to develop a project. And I think there's a lot of times that we're experiencing that people are on the sideline and are just saying, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And that's not helping the process, and it's not helping the communities, and it's not helping Malaysia in that sense in monetizing this benefit that they're having. Thank you.
Ed, one key message. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with Francois enough. Learning by doing and rolling up your sleeves is really important. You know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good and all that. In terms of what I would suggest from the earlier plenaries that we've listened to today, I know we haven't spoken too much about the policy side, but I'd say that some form of carbon pricing instrument seems to be inevitable coming to Malaysia, right? It's a sort of when rather than an if. And so what I'd like to suggest is that whether it's a carbon tax or an ETS or whatever, I'd strongly propose allowing some proportion of your compliance obligation to allow domestic emission reductions created in Malaysia to be eligible for that CPI. Because once you create the domestic demand, you'll see a huge flux of investment, as we saw in Colombia in 2016-17, as we saw in South Africa, as we've seen all around the world.
Jane?
I think my message will be very short. Let's go. Let's do it. Well, as Rich has said, there are opportunities in Malaysia. There are investors waiting to come in, and we have different part of supply chains that comes in. BBBs that is setting up shops. We have traders that are waiting to trade credits in Malaysia. We have project developers that's coming in, right? What I would like to say is, yes, there are lots of studies that is going on. We're waiting for the policies to be perfected. We are waiting for the ecosystem to be completely set up. But no, don't wait, because climate change cannot wait. Let's just do it. All these seedlings and saplings of the small startups, the supply chain and the ecosystem that we're starting up, right? Let's just nurture it, right? In good time, Malaysia will be a healthy forest with all these seedlings and saplings of ecosystem that we are sowing now. Thank you.
And William, you normally charge for this sort of advice, but what would be your free advice to the people and government of Malaysia and the other businesses in Malaysia?
So a very similar message. I think that before joining Pollination, I worked in the compliance markets for a long time. I worked with governments around the world in helping them build the ecosystems to actually put in place carbon pricing policies. And listening to what I've heard today and engaging in Malaysia, I think Malaysia has all the ingredients that you need to actually get a really robust policy in place. And I think the launch of the Malaysian Carbon Market Association today is another really good feature of that to bring corporates together. So my advice would be, don't dwell on the perfect, because these things are complex and they will naturally need to evolve over time. But get a carbon price in place that at least links some proportion of compliance to the voluntary carbon market or the carbon credit market, and continue to support excellent projects in Malaysia.
Liam?
Thanks, Rich. I've only been back in Asia for the last 6 months. I spent 4 years in London before then, but I've already been to KL and Malaysia 3 or 4 times in that time, and It's the place I've travelled to the most in the region. I think that's reflective of the potential and of the opportunity in Malaysia and of the capacity that's really being built here and the thought and the care that's going in there. Coming from a rating agency perspective, you know, I'll continue the theme on integrity, but all the plenaries have touched on it. It's not a nice to have, it's really important, and it's the key way of maximising the value of the assets that can be created here in Malaysia.
Thanks, Liam, and I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative for part of the last 1 minute to add one final thought to those, and that would be for everyone in the room, going against everything that every other person said today, just put all the problems and integrity stuff out of your mind. That is going to be solved and is being solved, and focus on what a mind-bogglingly gigantic opportunity this is for Malaysia. If the carbon market went away today, nobody would miss it. Like it's done 2 billion tonnes of abatement since it started 25 years ago. But what they'll really miss is its potential. We are not going to solve climate change without it. And just to size the opportunity, Malaysia is uniquely placed to benefit from this opportunity because of all the things we said about today. Sophisticated economy, you know, educated workforce, large intact forest estate that can be monetised. And to put it in perspective, two things to keep in mind. Net zero, we're doing about 250 million tonnes a year of abatement in the carbon market at the moment. Net zero is 50,000 million tonnes of abatement every year forever. Or to put it another way, we've got to do 75 times more abatement in the next 2,000 days than we've done in human history. And Malaysia has an opportunity to really ride that wave. As the panel has said, it can get the policy right that includes domestic offset use, that is high integrity, that is, you know, flexible and integrated with broader decarbonisation, and let's just go. Thanks, everybody.
And on that note, thank you, Rich and the panelists, and let's close this session with a panel shot. Indeed, that was an insightful discussion on nature-based projects. It's clear that these initiatives are crucial for our sustainable future, and the lessons shared today will indeed inspire many of us to take action.